Egypt, Qatar, and the United States have released a joint statement after 2 days of talks in Doha, backing a so-called bridging proposal. They hope the new draft will bring Hamas and Israel toward a ceasefire deal. Hamas, which did not take part in the talks, is accusing Israel of negotiating in bad faith. The talks are aimed at ending the 10-month-long war in Gaza, securing the release of Israeli hostages, and averting a wider regional conflagration. And negotiations are set to resume next week in Cairo. Speaking to reporters in Washington, U.S. President Joe Biden expressed optimism about the new deal.
I'll say one thing about one of the reasons why I was late for you all was I was dealing with the ceasefire effort in the Middle East. And we are closer than we've ever been. I don't want to jinx anything. May have something. But we're not there yet. But it's much, much closer than it was 3 days ago. So keep your fingers crossed. Thank you.
Let's get more on this with journalist Balig Sladeen in Tel Aviv, who's been following this story for us. So Biden there sounding quite optimistic. Israel has now also put out a statement saying it appreciates the mediators' efforts to convince Hamas to agree to a deal. What do you think this statement tells us about Israel's thinking on the way the talks are going so far?
Well, that takes us back to the position that the Prime Minister Netanyahu holds, that the few, not changes exactly, but more clarification that Israel has requested from the mediators should be actually accepted by Hamas. And he is hoping, or Israel is hoping, that the mediators will put more pressure on Hamas in order to reach that deal. In Israel, there are some talks that the fact that the delegation that went to Cairo on Thursday stayed one more night, it was supposed to come back in the same night, but stayed one more night because of the impression that Deri Barnea, the head of the Mossad, and the other members of the delegation had when they met their Qatari counterparts and the Qatari officials, saying that, or at least according to sources, they are putting more pressure on Hamas, and that's why they stayed one more night and they made more talks on the topic on Friday as well, so today as well. And the talks, as I said, are, as you said, excuse me, are presumed to resume on Sunday in Cairo, and supposed to be dealing with or focusing on the Philadelphia corridor issue.
Yeah, tell us more about that. What are these remaining gaps that the mediators are hoping to address?
Well, two main issues and a third bigger issue, let's say. The first two issues that are being dealt with right now is the Philadelphia corridor. Prime Minister Netanyahu wants the Israeli army to stay in the Philadelphia corridor in the first phase of the deal. The deal is supposed to be 3 phases. So the first phase, the humanitarian phase, Netanyahu wants Israeli troops to stay in Philadelphia corridor because he believes, and of course the other security branches in Israel believe, that Hamas will be able to rehabilitate themselves if Israel gets out of there through the tunnel networks and through smuggling of weaponry. That's first. The second issue is the Netzarim corridor, this same corridor that Israel made that splits the Gaza Strip into 2 parts. Netanyahu wants to monitor, wants some way, some system to monitor the people that go back to their homes to the north of the Gaza Strip, not to carry weapons with them, so not militants, only civilians. Until now, there is no solution for the monitoring issue, and Hamas, of course, refuses that. And the bigger issue is the fact that Hamas still wants Israel to declare the end of the war at the end of the first phase. That's another bigger issue, I guess.
Yeah, these are the sticking points. Thank you for laying those out. We know U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is flying to the region, and he's set to meet Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Do we know anything about what might take place in this meeting?
Well, this is his 8th or 9th, if I'm not mistaken, visit to the region. Blinken supposed to come back, like, I don't think that he has anything new to offer. Just the same as Hochstein in Lebanon a couple of days ago, he didn't have anything new to the Lebanese and to the Israelis with his visit, and that's I guess is going to be the same situation here. Of course, when we are in Friday night in Israel, so it's the Shabbat. Israeli officials don't put out statements about this in this time, but Blinken's supposed to meet the Israeli officials on Monday morning Israel time, and to try to convince the Israelis to go for this ceasefire deal and put more pressure on Israel. The Americans, their main concern right now is not to not to be dragged into full-blown out war between Israel and Iran, and they see an opportunity here. If Israel and Hamas, of course, agree to that ceasefire deal, maybe that will be avoided, and even the entire strike that Iran is vowing to conduct maybe could also be avoided.
But let's get the very latest here from journalist Karim El-Gawhary, following that story for us from Cairo. Good to see you again. After this second day of talks, do we know what is contained in this so-called bridging proposal?
No, we don't have really any details. It's said that it's closing the gaps, and it's based on an old proposal that's on the table since May, basically. In this proposal, we have several phases in which Palestinian prisoners and Israeli hostages are exchanged, first for a 6 weeks ceasefire, then for a permanent ceasefire. This proposal, Israel rejected it because they didn't accept the idea of a permanent ceasefire, and Hamas wanted to have a full withdrawal of the Israeli army from the Gaza Strip. Now, what means here closing the gaps, we really don't know yet. But it seems to be that there's enough in it that all parties will meet again end of next week in Cairo.
So parties meeting again in Cairo, is it too early to say what kind of reaction we've seen from Hamas and the Israeli side to what's been discussed so far?
Yeah, I think maybe it is too early because the Israeli delegation is leaving Doha now back to Israel, where they have to, of course, bring this back to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is going to meet also on Monday the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. And, of course, Hamas has to bring back the proposal to Yahya Sinwar in Gaza, in order also to say what they say about it. There's a first statement unofficially by Hamas saying that this is not what was agreed upon until now, but that, as I said, is an unofficial statement. We really have to wait what the leadership itself is going to say about this.
So still waiting, as you say, from that official statement from the Hamas leadership. Talks are due to continue next week in Cairo. Can you just spell out for us a little bit more where we think we are going to see these remaining obstacles?
Well, I mean, what is interesting is the pressure that is done now, mainly, I think, by the U.S. It's interesting that the U.S. was the one who vetoed ceasefire ideas in the UN Security Council for many months. Now it seems that a ceasefire cannot come fast enough for the U.S. Of course, that has mainly two reasons. There is the fear of a real escalation in the region with Iran, with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and with the Houthis in Yemen. That's one fear. And there's the upcoming U.S. elections. I think this is why the U.S. is trying now very, very hard to bring all sides together, because they need this success. But as I said, we don't know until now what closing the gaps here really means by substance.
We have heard quite an optimistic tone coming from the U.S., I must say. The National Security spokesperson stressing earlier today that these remaining obstacles can be overcome. Do you think we're seeing that same optimism coming from other mediators?
Well, that remains to be. Mediators may be. I mean, the decisive thing is what Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and what Yahya Sinwar from Hamas is going to say about it. They have the ultimate say about it. But obviously, all sides are now under enormous pressure by the US and also by the other mediators, by Egypt and by Qatar, who are really afraid of a further escalation in the region if this deal doesn't come to a close. And that would be an escalation that might be very, very difficult to control.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today on DW News. That is journalist Karim El-Gawhary in Cairo.
You're welcome.